Welcome and thank you for coming late. I know 5:15. I'm really impressed to see that many people. So this session is all about advanced Lightning components. So we'll cover some advanced topics. I'm going to assume, how many people here has built a Lightning component before? That's exactly what I wanted to see, because we're going to try to go a little deeper today. So my name is Christoph Conrads. I'm a developer evangelist at Salesforce. You can follow me on Twitter, and I try to blog and post examples about that specific topic. Now, I have to tell you, as a developer, this is the most uncomfortable slide that I have to present, because I think I have, at least I hope I have a developer voice, and every time I talk to this slide, I feel very uncomfortable. Have you seen this slide before? And so, too many times? Okay. I thought, okay, this is a Lightning component session, and Lightning components can do everything and anything. So I was wondering if I could hack a quick Lightning component that could help me with this slide. So I'll show you what I did, and I'm not sure that it's going to work, but we'll see. Okay, so we have a Lightning page here. And you see I have that nice text-to-speech component. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back, and now we'll see if it works.
You should make your purchasing decisions based on currently available features and not forward-looking statements made in this presentation.
There you go. So I don't have to do it. Thank you. You see, Lightning components can actually do everything and even help me with the forward-looking statements. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the agenda. So there are 4 topics that we will cover today. Advanced data access strategies, data binding behind the obvious, and then we'll see how to build to write modules or modular code. And finally, we'll end with some fun stuff, hopefully with events and all sorts of events, including platform events. How many people went to the keynote this morning? You saw that platform event demo? Well, we'll take a look behind the curtains and see really how it was built. Okay, so let's get started with data access. And this doesn't sound like the most exciting topic, but let me tell you, this is by far the most important topic. The biggest impact you can have on the performance of your application is to really focus on that. Sometimes people ask me really detailed questions about DOM rendering and really deep topics because they have some performance issues in their application. The first thing you need to look at is data access, because most of the time, that's where the bottlenecks are. And so there are some basic guidelines. You know, before you go to the server, think and ask yourself the question, do I really need to go to the server to get that data? Or is the data already available somewhere else, maybe in another component? And the basic rule there is don't retrieve the same data in different components, right? So to kind of make that point, I wanted to quickly jump to a demo. And I'll show you some of the apps that I built over the years. And I will start with this one. How many people have seen Dreamhouse? Nobody? Oh, OK, great, fantastic. Now, the first time I built Dreamhouse, that was a long time ago. I think that was close to 2 years ago. And you see there are a number of components here. One, so that's how many days on the market. If you have never seen Dreamhouse, it's an application for the real estate business, a simple application that you can download. So I'm going to count components here. 1 for days on the market, 1 for map, 1 for picture gallery. I think that's it. But of course, you have the path here at the top, so that's 4, and then you have the details. So that's essentially 5 components on the page. I wrote 3, and 2 are standard. Now, the first time I wrote that thing, all these components on the right were basic, you know, these components need access to the record, right? So to be able to display the number of days on the market, you need access to the record. How do you get access to the record? You make a call to some Apex controller that gives you access to the record. That sounded really great, and then I ended up doing the same thing for map, and then I ended up doing the same thing for picture gallery, and I'm pretty sure that internally the path component did the exact same thing, even though it didn't exist at that time, and the details component did the same thing. So essentially I had 4 or 5 calls to the server to get the exact same data. That is bad. You need to think about that. Another example, so this is some kind of interactive dashboard. And in this case, I'm looking at metals, gold, bronze, silver. But the idea here is that I have 3 components, right? And they interact with each other, and that's very cool. But if you don't pay attention, it's really easy to get carried away and say, well, these 3 components need the same data, so let's just retrieve the same data in these 3 components. And that's pretty bad. And then the last example that I wanted to quickly show you is this one. This is a sample application that I posted a few months ago. That's kind of a financial services application, a mutual fund explorer. And so this one is a little different. So you have a list of mutual funds here, and there are many of them, 500 in this sample application. And so a typical thing that a user will do is this, right? I'm gonna navigate through that, and then maybe I wanted to see that previous page again, and maybe I'm gonna do this again, right? And think about really, again, if you don't pay attention, what you're going to do is every time I say next page, I'm going to go to the server. And then I'm going to say previous page, and I'm going to go back to the server. But guess what? Like 2 seconds ago, I had the data. So why go to the server to retrieve the exact same data that I just had? Or you will have something like this. So here I can filter maybe by sector, right? So I'm going to look at mutual funds related to agriculture. Okay, so I had to go to the server to do that. And then I'm going to say, okay, let's go back to all mutual funds. And again, if you don't pay attention, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the server here when just a moment ago, you already had the data. So the solution to all these problems is basically 3 words. It's caching, caching, caching. You should cache everywhere, all the time, because you won't believe the difference that it makes in the performance of your application. And so I wanted to show you a couple of ways you can implement caching with Lightning components. The first one is called storable actions. And that one is fantastic because you almost have nothing to do. In fact, you just have to add 1 line of code, and all of a sudden your application is going to start performing a lot better. So that's pretty good. So let's take a look at some code here. So that's the Mutual Fund Explorer code, right? And you recognize the pattern. So I have an Apex controller somewhere that has a getFunds method, and then I will call that method. I will pass some parameters before, and then as you always do, this is an asynchronous call, obviously, so you set up a callback. Now, look at line 4 here. So that's the 1 line that I added to my call. And basically I say, mark that action, so that method invocation, as storable. By storable, we mean store the result of that call in client cache. Okay? And that's magically a feature of the framework, so this is nothing you have to implement, it's there. Okay? So that 1 line of code. Okay? So now let's go back to this, and I wanted to show you this in action. So let's refresh to make sure we start from scratch here. And if you pay attention here, you see I kind of log out to the console, the time it takes to actually retrieve the mutual funds. And you can see that the first time it took 187 milliseconds. Okay, all right, not bad. So now I'm on page 1. I'm going to go on page 2. And you see that when I go on page 2, it takes 194 milliseconds. Page 3, pretty consistent, a little more here, 300 milliseconds. But look at the magic now. I'm going to go back to page 2, which I already obviously have in cache, 0.625 milliseconds. You see the difference here? This is, boom, immediate. There is no call to the server because that method invocation with the exact same parameter, and in this case the parameter is the page number, which is 2, I have it in cache, so no need to go to the server. I'm going to go to page 1, 0.5 milliseconds. Page 2, immediate. Now I'm going to go to page 4, boom, again 200 milliseconds because that one I didn't have in memory. This alone makes a huge difference. Now, again, I could do this. So I could filter here. So I'm going to filter, let's filter by, let's say, sector. Agriculture. OK, so to go to agriculture, it takes time because I didn't do that filter before. So I'm going to go back to everything, immediate. If I go back to agriculture now, 0.5 milliseconds. Okay, so you see the type of difference that it can make. All right, so let's go back to the slides and kind of try to understand how that really works. And there are a couple of things that you really need to know when you work with storable action. So the first thing is it's super easy. You just add set storable. Now, I want to make it super clear that you should only use set storable for non-mutable functions, because otherwise you expose yourself to really weird behaviors. What is a non-mutable function? It's a function that is not going to update data in the database, right? Because if you cache update methods, that's going to be weird. Okay, so essentially, it's read-only methods that you cache with set storable. Now, there are two numbers that you need to be aware of. One is called refresh age, and the other one is called expiration age. Refresh age is 30 seconds. That means that for 30 seconds, we will consider the data fresh. After 30 seconds, so in other words, if the data has been in cache for longer than 30 seconds, we'll say, maybe it's still OK, but I will refresh it behind the scenes. So the framework is going to refresh the data behind the scenes. Okay? And so the second parameter, the second value that you need to be aware of is 900. 900 seconds, that's the expiration age. After 900 seconds, I think that's 15 minutes, the data will be considered expired. We won't even look at it. OK, so let's take a couple of quick examples here. So in my first example, let's say that the data that I'm asking for has not been cached yet or has been cached a long time ago, over 900 seconds ago. So your component on the left here is going to make a call, so a request, an action to the framework. Now, that your call that you write, of course, doesn't go directly to the server. It goes to the Lightning Component Framework. And the Lightning Component Framework is going to say, let me try to be smart. I'm going to ask the cache, is that data available in cache? The cache is going to say, no, sorry, not available. Then the framework is going to do what you expect. It's going to go to the server, and the server is going to return a response. But here is what we will do. We will set that response in cache because you marked that action as storable. And then, and then, of course, we will send the response to the component simply by calling its callback function. Right? OK, so now if another component did the same thing, invoked the same method with the same attributes, here is what would happen. I make the request. The framework tries to be smart, says, do you have that response in cache? The client cache says, yes, I have it. And here is the response. And the framework passes it immediately to the component. And the server is never involved. Okay, so you think you're making a call to the server, but behind the scenes, you're actually getting the data from the cache. Okay, and so here is the last example now, where we have the data in cache. but it's a little old. Not like older than the expiration age, but older than the refresh age. Remember, refresh age was 30 seconds, right? So let's say that the data has been in cache for 45 seconds. Should we consider that fresh? Should we take that data? Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So I make a call to a server action. The framework says, OK, let's ask the cache. The cache says, here is a response, but it's older than the refresh age, but younger than the expiration age. So the framework is going to say, well, the component wants immediate response, so I'm going to send it right away to the component, right? It's 45 seconds old, maybe it's still good. But behind the scenes, what the framework will do automatically is make a request to the server. The nice thing is the component already has the response, okay? And the framework says, let me check if the data is still okay. And so you get a response from the server. That response is set back in the cache. And then if and only if that response that you just got from the server is different from the response that you got from the cache, number 3 here, only in that case will we call the callback function a second time. So we'll say, oops, I gave you that response, but in fact, I checked with the server, and there is a new value, OK? So you need to understand that, because that may sound a little weird at first, that your callback function can actually be invoked twice. Now, if we have JavaScript gurus in the room, this is also why you shouldn't use promises with storable actions. Because a promise, if you don't know what a promise is, it's a kind of a new way to invoke asynchronous functions instead of using callback functions. But a promise is really built to be so that the response, so that it is resolved only once. And you can't really resolve a promise twice, OK? So important to know. Are we clear on storable actions? So that's the easiest. You can go back to your hotel room tonight and set storable all over the places. Remember, only non-mutable. And you will be amazed at the difference that it makes. So that's a first way to add caching to your applications. There is a second way, which is called the Lightning Data Service. How many people have used the Lightning Data Service? A few of you. So it's actually just in beta right now in summer 17. It used to be in pilot, now it's in beta. So let me show you how this works. So imagine that you have 3 components on a page, and that's really a good, the same use case I use for my dream house sample application with all these components on the right. They all needed access to the property record, right? So component A is going to ask the Lightning Data Service, hey, I need that record identified here by 111. That's just representing an object ID here. And I need 2 fields, name and phone. So the Lightning Data Service at this point doesn't have that record, let's say, in memory. So what it's going to do, it's going to make a call to the server and retrieve exactly what you asked for, the ID, the name, and the phone number. Now what's going to happen next is that the second component is going to do the same thing. Maybe it needs the exact same thing. So it makes a call to the Lightning Data Service, please give me that record. At that point, the Lightning Data Service has that record, and it's going to say, there you go, no server call involved, right? And look here, this is slightly more interesting. Let's say that another component, maybe the third component, needs the same record, but additional fields. So in addition to the phone, I need a mobile phone. I'm asking that to the Lightning Data Service, and the Lightning Data Service is going to say, OK, I have the record, but I don't have that extra field, so I'll just fetch that extra field from the server. You have nothing to do. All you have to do is ask politely the Lightning Data Service for a specific record. OK, so let me actually show you an example for people who have not seen how to invoke a record, or how to ask for a record with the Lightning Data Service. So it used to be called Force Record Preview because it was a preview feature. Now it's beta, so that's the final name, Force Record Data. Okay? And you pass a record ID, and then you specify target fields, so the fields that are going to be populated with the response, and you ask the fields that you want. Now, the nice thing about data service is what? Is that there is no Apex call to write. Okay, that's all you have to do, and you're going to get that record. You're going to get these fields. There is, in fact, if you look at the top of my component, you see that there is no Apex controller here. Okay, so no Apex code to write, immediate access to the server. The other thing that's really cool is that because you are actually sharing the same record in memory, if one component is going to change a value in that record, automatically all the other components will pick up that change. And you no longer have these UIs that are kind of disconnected where one component shows one value and another component shows another value for the same record on the exact same page. That is never a good thing. So that's another benefit of using the Lightning Data Service. Make sense? Great. I did that. OK, so let's move on to the second topic here, that is data binding. Now, data binding, I'm going to assume that you are all familiar with this syntax, right? Curly, exclamation mark, and then a value. And it's basically a placeholder. And we are going to inject the value that you requested there. So in this case, the first name of the contact, curly, exclamation mark. That is what we call bound expressions. And that is, in fact, an implementation of two-way data binding, also known as bidirectional data binding. Okay? Now, what that means in terms of being bidirectional is that if the model changes, what is the model in this case? It's the attribute, right? The specific contact. If the model changes, if the contact changes, the input field is going to change automatically. So that's one way. And the other way is if you change the value in the input field, the model is going to change automatically. So in other words, contact is going to change automatically. This is super cool, but it's also super expensive. Because behind the scenes, and this is pseudocode, but behind the scenes, for every single bound expression that you declare, we need to set up two event listeners. We need to set up at the top an event listener on the model, on the contact object, and say, hey, when the contact changes, automatically set that new value in the input field. And we need to set up a second event listener that says, hey, if the user changes the value in the input field, we need to update the model. So that is exactly what we need to do behind the scenes. Now, think about my example here. I'm going back one slide. Unfortunately, that thing happened in an iteration. So in other words, a loop. So you can imagine here how many event listeners I'm setting up. Right? This can become really, really expensive. So in Spring 17, we introduced unbound expressions, where we don't set up these listeners. The syntax is similar, but instead of exclamation mark, it's hashtag. Now, the biggest misunderstanding here is that this is not one-way data binding. It's not. But it's actually one-time data binding. Okay? And so at first, this may be hard to understand. So let's take a look at a quick example. So here, I have, in maybe Property Explorer. Let's look at this. Okay, so I have a list of properties here, right? So obviously, this is a loop. This is an array. So let's take a look at the code. I have property tile list here, and I have that iteration here, and you see that I have property tile, which is another component. And right now, it's using two-way data binding. So after this session, you know that when you can, you should really try to do this, because that's going to be cheaper, right? You don't have to set up all these listeners. Okay, so I'm going to do this, and of course, I want to make sure that it still works, and it does. It still works. And the reason it still works is because these objects are created on the fly. The tiles are created on the fly, by that iteration construct here. Now, let's take another example. See, when I click one of these tiles, you have all these components on the right that adjust automatically. This one is called property summary. Let's take a look at property summary. It's right here. And remember that it shows the address and the number of bedrooms, dates it appeared on the market. So, let's look at address, okay? See, it shows the address here. Okay, so let's try to replace this two-way data binding with unbound expression, okay? So let's save that, and now I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to do that, and oops, you see the city still works, but the address doesn't show up. And the reason is, look, when I first instantiate that page, that component is created. Remember, one-time data binding. At this point, the address property is undefined. It doesn't matter because it binds it to undefined. And then it's unbound, meaning that if you change the value after that, there is no listener to tell this HTML element here to update. So you understand the difference between, this is not one-way data binding, this is one time. It works really, really well for iterations because when you work with iterations, by definition, you already have the object. Okay, so the one time works really well. And that's good because iterations is when it gets really, really expensive. Okay, so we did that. Let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is about writing modular code. So why would you do that? Well, there are two main reasons. The first one is that you may have code, and I'm sure a lot of you may have struggled with that before. I have code that I need to reuse in several components. Anybody struggled with that? How do I do that? These components are very kind of self-contained. How do I share code between components? And sometimes you also want to share in-memory data. So there are two approaches to solve that problem. The bottom line is, in new JavaScript, like ECMAScript 6, in ECMAScript 6, they introduced modules, finally, in JavaScript. All right? Now, this is not yet supported in Lightning Components because modules are not supported in all browsers, so you typically have to pre-compile using Babel or something like that in JavaScript, so we can't totally support that yet. But you can still use something that is similar. I will discuss two approaches here, JavaScript libraries and non-visual components. So let's start with JavaScript libraries. How many people have used LTNG require in their code to use third-party libraries? A number of you. So there is a tag in the Lightning Component framework called LTNG require. If you remember these charts that were cool looking, so that is Chart.js. It's a third-party JavaScript library that you can use. You can use a variety of libraries. Why not yours? You can also write a JavaScript library, right? A JavaScript library is just a .js file. Okay, so let me show you a very sophisticated example that I built here. Now, the easiest way to do that is to do it as a static resource. So I'm opening a static resource here, and you see that I have that thing called counter. And this is my JavaScript. it's not something that I got from the web. I wrote that thing. That is my reusable code. I need logic to implement a counter. It has an increment function and a get value function. Okay? And I'm attaching that to the window object. All right? So now I have a component here that happens to need that very cool counter logic, right? So what do? I LTNG require it, and that's my counter static resource, okay? And starting from here, you see I have two buttons, get value and increment, and I call these things. So basically what I do here is I call the get value method of my counter library and the increment value of my counter library, okay? So let's see if that works. I'm going to go back to my demos page, and I'm quickly going to add my counter function. In fact, just for fun, I'm going to add two of them. We'll see why in a second. Okay? All right. And so now I can start doing this. Okay, get value, it starts at 0. And I can invoke increment. So remember, that increment logic was not defined in my component. It's defined in that JavaScript library. Now, obviously, this is a super simplistic example, but think about what you could do. Now, what you need to be aware of, and that is exactly why I pasted two instances, is that, look, the second instance, when I say get value, it picks up the value of the other one. So in other words, that library is a singleton. All the components share the same library, okay? And if that library declares values and attributes, I get the same thing. So if I increment here, and then I do get value here, boom, I pick up that thing, right? In many cases, that's exactly what you want, okay? You could implement caching that way, by the way. Right? If you want to cache values yourself, you can totally do that. In some cases, that may not be what you want. That's totally fine, because I have another version for you here that I called counter2. And in this case, I implement more of a constructor pattern, right? So the way I will instantiate counter is by doing I will create an instance of counter. So in that case, each component will have its own instance of counter, okay? So that is just another pattern here to new these instances, and in that case, it should be completely isolated. So let's take a look at counter2, the component that uses that. So in this case, I load counter2. Now, undoing it, look what I'm doing. I'm creating a new instance of counter that I store as an attribute of the component instead of defining a set attribute. That can be a shortcut if you want. And for the rest, it's the exact same thing. So now, if I go back to the page here, and add counter2, what you're going to see here, if I save this, all right, is that now if I do get value, I increment, and this one has its own instance, and I can increment this way, and if I do get value here, it's completely isolated. Okay, so you can use different patterns. All right, there is another way of reusing code, and specifically code that's related to data access logic. So, and that is to create non-visual components, or sometimes people call them service components, service lightning components. And so I created one that I want to show you very quickly here. It's called account data service. So it is a Lightning component, but as you can see, it has absolutely no UI. You can't find any UI component there, right? It's going to be completely invisible. And it has an Aura method, in other words, a method that another component can invoke. And that method is called findAll. Now, when that method is invoked, I call getAccounts. Notice that my component that is non-visual has a controller, an Apex controller. So let's look at getAccounts here. Okay? So that is business as usual. You invoke a method in your controller called getAllAccounts. And now I'm going to look at a component that uses that service component. So this is AccountList. This component has a UI, and as you can imagine, it's going to show a list of accounts. But look, it doesn't have any Apex controller. The only thing that it does is it embeds, if you want, it uses account service, right? And on init, it's simply gonna invoke, it's gonna find that component and invoke its findAll method, okay? So now, if I go back to my demo page here and add account list, you will see it should even show up in App Builder. You see that I have my list, and there you have it. Now, one nice thing about this, and maybe you have hit that problem before, is that this is a way, you see, normally if you wanted a list of accounts here, you would define a controller and you would define probably account controller. Oftentimes people ask me, oh, can a component have more than one controller? Because in this component, I need to work with accounts and I need to work with contacts. And the answer is no. A component has one controller. What you could do is create a facade controller in Apex, right? Like a first controller that you go to, and behind the scenes you invoke different classes. That would be one way to do it. But with this approach, you could also do something like this, right? I have an account data service, and now I could create a contact data service. And the reason I can do that is because it's not my component itself here that declares the controller. It's these services. Does that make sense? Cool. Now we have a few minutes to discuss the very last topic, events. If component B is included in component A, and component B wants to say something to component A, which type of event should I use? So B is included in A, and B wants to say something to A. I'm going to do that with an event. Component event. Please, in this case, do not use application events. It would work, but it's too expensive, and it's also too confusing because now that event is broadcast generally, and other components may potentially listen to it, and that is not a good idea. So in this specific case, you use component events. Now, if component A and component B do not have parent-child relationships, they are completely independent, what would you use? An application event, right? And so that's the typical App Builder use case. In App Builder, that is really the only way two components you drop in App Builder can communicate with each other through an application event. If you are finding yourself using application events outside App Builder, think twice, because you may be doing something wrong, and consider the first option, okay? And now, super exciting, if two systems need to communicate with each other, in other words, two completely different applications. One can be an app that you build, you know, on the Salesforce platform. One can be anything else, like this morning, the manufacturing app. What type of event do you use for that? Platform events, okay? So let's very quickly, we have like 1 minute here to revisit what happened this morning, and then I'm going to show you the trick. It's not really a trick. Okay, so we had this, okay, and it was in draft. You remember that from this morning? All right, and then we had something else, an app on Heroku that was the manufacturing app. Okay, and the Heroku app has to wake up. Okay, all right. And so the idea of an application event is that if I submit it to manufacturing, boom, you see the event came in. Sorry for the small resolution here, okay? And the other way around, if I approve it here, you see that automatically the status changes to approved. So a platform event was sent by the Salesforce app to Heroku, and Heroku, when you click approve, publishes a platform event that the Salesforce application, and in that case, that path application is listening to. Okay? So now I'm going to take a few seconds to show you the code that we didn't show you this morning. So this is the path component. This is a custom path component, okay? And you see that it's using the data service, the Lightning data service, to get access to the record. But it has that thing here, a subscriber. You see that? And it basically says, I'm subscribing to mix approved __ E, which is that platform event, right? Now, don't look at subscribe. Don't go back to your hotel room and type subscriber because you don't have that component. It's just that I wrote it as another example of a service component because a lot of components want to subscribe to platform events. So look what I did here. I created subscriber CMP, so I created a subscriber component, okay? And so look the way it works. Again, it's a component without any UI, okay? And I'm importing a library which happens to be commit_d. Now, if you have been using before the streaming API in Salesforce, you're familiar with commit_d because that's also the protocol that we use in the streaming API, okay? So basically, my subscriber here loads the Commit API JavaScript library, and then I have a little bit of code here, and that's just, coming straight from the commit_d documentation here. But essentially, this is the important line. Number 16, I'm subscribing to event name, whatever you pass to me. Remember here, when you declare the subscriber, you pass an event name. So in the implementation here, I'm listening to this, and then I'm firing a component event that my mix path component listens to. This is now a component event, and this is where it changes the step in the custom path component. Does that make sense? So this is actually a nice example that combines platform events to listen to the message coming in from the Heroku app, and then that subscriber transform that in a component event that my custom path is listening to. So the good news is platform events are not complicated at all. There are a few lines of JavaScript that you have to write, and a good approach is to do like I did here. You isolate, you encapsulate that in a subscriber component that you can then reuse all over the place, simply providing the name of the event you're listening to. All right, that's a lot to cover in not a lot of time. But we are done. So to summarize what I told you, I think the slide is wrong. I told you cache, cache, cache. Remember, cache everything, but only non-mutable methods. Use unbound expression whenever possible, especially in iterations, because it's a lot cheaper. You don't have that two-way data binding, these two listeners to implement. I gave you two approaches to modularize your code. JavaScript library is super easy. You don't think about it. You just import third-party libraries, but you can create your own libraries and then use the right type of event for the right task. With that, that is all the time we have. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be around. If you have questions, I'll be here. Thanks. Welcome, and thank you for coming late. I know 5:15. I'm really impressed to see that many people. So this session is all about advanced Lightning components. So we'll cover some advanced topics. I'm going to assume, how many people here has built a Lightning component before? That's exactly what I wanted to see, because we're going to try to go a little deeper today. So my name is Christoph Conrads. I'm a developer evangelist at Salesforce. You can follow me on Twitter, and I try to blog and post examples about that specific topic. Now, I have to tell you, as a developer, this is the most uncomfortable slide that I have to present, because I think I have, at least I hope I have a developer voice, and every time I talk to this slide, I feel very uncomfortable. Have you seen this slide before? And so, too many times? Okay. I thought, okay, this is a Lightning component session, and Lightning components can do everything and anything. So I was wondering if I could hack a quick Lightning component that could help me with this slide. So I'll show you what I did, and I'm not sure that it's going to work, but we'll see. Okay, so we have a Lightning page here. And you see I have that nice text-to-speech component. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back, and now we'll see if it works.
You should make your purchasing decisions based on currently available features and not forward-looking statements made in this presentation.
There you go. So I don't have to do it. Thank you. You see, Lightning components can actually do everything and even help me with the forward-looking statements. So with that out of the way, oh, okay, great, fantastic. Now, the first time I built Dreamhouse, that was a long time ago. I think that was close to 2 years ago. And you see there are a number of components here. One, so that's how many days on the market. If you have never seen Dreamhouse, it's an application for the real estate business, a simple application that you can download. So I'm going to count components here. One for days on the market, one for map, one for picture gallery. I think that's it. But of course, you have the path here at the top, so that's four, and then you have the details. So that's essentially 5 components on the page. I wrote 3, and 2 are standard. Now, the first time I wrote that thing, all these components on the right were basic, these components need access to the record, right? So to be able to display the number of days on the market, you need detailed questions about DOM rendering and really deep topics, because they have some performance issues in their application. The first thing you need to look at is data access, because most of the time, that's where the bottlenecks are. And so there are some basic guidelines. Before you go to the server, think and ask yourself the question, do I really need to go to the server to get that data? Or is the data already available somewhere else, maybe in another component? And the basic rule there is don't retrieve the same data in different components, right? So to kind of make that point, I wanted to quickly jump to a demo, and I'll show you some of the apps that I built over the years, and I will start with this one. How many people have seen Dreamhouse? Nobody? Let's take a look at the agenda. So there are 4 topics that we will cover today. Advanced data access strategies, data binding behind the obvious, and then we'll see how to build to write modules or modular code, and finally we'll end with some fun stuff, hopefully with events and all sorts of events, including platform events. How many people went to the keynote this morning? You saw that platform event demo? Well, we'll take a look behind the curtains and see really how it was built. Okay, so let's get started. with data access. And this doesn't sound like the most exciting topic, but let me tell you, this is by far the most important topic. The biggest impact you can have on the performance of your application is to really focus on that. Sometimes people ask me, really,